I'm going to start recording us. So welcome everybody. Looks like everyone's doing okay. I don't see any issues. So I want to go over today talking about your field trip homework assignments. I finally got that posted. So the first one is going to be due the Monday after spring break. So remember, spring break is next week. So we won't have classes next week, but you can use that time to go on one of these field trips. Let me just pull it up so that you guys can see it. So what I want you to do, you guys can see the Word doc now? Okay, so basically you're going to do 3 of these to the end of the semester. So I'm hoping, because I spaced them out, that you could potentially go to the same spot 3 times if you wanted to and see different birds or different behaviors, because the migration will kind of set in over this time period, or find different places. Basically, the goal is to just get you out observing birds in any way possible. My plan, obviously, if we were on campus, is that we'd be doing this together, but now I'm just going to make it on your own, that you can do this. Honestly, my hope is that, I think these next 2 weeks or so are really critical for us to be like super isolated from each other, and I'm going to try to be very strict. And then maybe some hope by the end of April that we could meet up for, a 6-foot distance, social distant bird walk together for the people who are kind of still in driving distance of the area. So you could do one of these as a group. But either way, what you're going to do is observe for at least 30 minutes, taking more time if you can, especially if it's a nice day and you want to be wandering around outside. So I want you to include a description of the study site. So you're going to do this. I would love for you to put it on eBird when you do it. But then the thing that you're going to hand in to me is kind of these 4 things. So the first one is a description of your study site. If you have a yard or in your neighborhood or a local park, that works fine. There's going to be birds in all those places. But if you're not feeling well, or you don't really feel comfortable going outside, or you want to be more secluded, Cornell is putting a whole bunch of webcams live. So there's even more kind of coming online. So checking out what's available there and doing your observation of one of the webcams is great. I peeked in on a barred owl today, and I don't recommend you do that one because it's a barred owl nesting and they're on eggs right now. So it's literally just a bird sitting on the webcam. That would be a very boring 30-minute observation. So look around, see which one has plenty of activity, and choose one of those if you don't feel like going outside for any of these. I would choose a nice day to do this on. You don't have to be killing yourself for this. So description of your study site, it can be online. A list of the birds you observed. I'd like species and numbers of individuals. That's the type of information that you'd be putting in eBird. So I recommend you put it in eBird as well. But then also identify the behaviors that you observed. So I understand that not everyone has binoculars now, and maybe you're not really sure about your identification. So if you're not sure about identification, spend more time trying to figure out what the birds are doing that you see. So signs of breeding, which are kind of turning on right now. It starts with just males singing, but then we'll also be able to see females carrying nesting material or insects. So that's how you actually could be able to locate a nest, is if you see a male and a female going back and forth to the same bush or tree, you might be able to locate the nest in the end. Males fighting can also be a sign that they're kind of in territorial disputes, so take note of that. And then if you see interactions between birds, do you see different individuals or species interacting? I would think males and females are going to be kind of paired up now, so taking note of if you feel like certain birds are hanging out with each other. And then since you're going to be out there, do you see any changes in behavior related to human activity? So if you're walking through a park, are the birds responding to your presence? Maybe some, short flight initiation distance things to just kind of see if you can get closer to the birds, that type of stuff. So once you kind of done that, you're going to go back home and go on to the Birds of North America online, which, since I told you guys about it, they renamed it Birds of the World. So now it's got a bigger amount of birds on it. So I included on here the login information. So remember, you have to go through the society website that I'm a member of. So you go to this American Ornithology site, and then for AOS members, go here to log in to Birds of the World, and then you can use my username and password to get on. And so what I want you to do then is pick one of the species that you saw and write up at least 5 facts about this bird. So things that you think are interesting. It'd be great if it related to some sort of behavior that you saw, but I don't really know what you guys are going to end up seeing. So like open, just read over about them, come up with some facts that you can give us. And I'm hoping we can kind of share that with the class because not everyone's going to choose the same bird. Any questions about this assignment? Good. Okay, so that one's due right out on Monday after we get back. So make sure you're doing it. Okay, so let's go over the Genius of Birds questions. This is the very last chapter. Hopefully you have them in front of you. I thought, can you tell why I love this chapter? All the sparrows stuff. It was pretty exciting. So I kind of want to go over all of these if you guys are game. Is that okay? Okay. So how does the ability of house sparrows to adapt to human civilization relate to what's happening to all birds in the Anthropocene? So who can define Anthropocene to me or anything? Jonah, you want to define Anthropocene?
So Anthropocene is like all of the changes relating to humans being like the major factor of change in the environment. So like all of the developments and making parking lots out of like fields and all of that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's very debated if it actually is like a geologic period. Some people say that the disturbances that we're making to the earth are going to show up in the fossil record at this point, so then it would be defined kind of as a geologic period in time. Other people just kind of use it as a wrapper for the period of time on earth when humans were making huge changes to biodiversity and to urbanization and all of that. So who wants to answer the question about how does the ability of house sparrows to adapt to human civilization relate to everything that's happening to birds right now? Oh, yeah, Zach, go ahead.
Some birds are going to be able to adapt while other ones won't, and sparrows are one of the ones that are going to be able to adapt to the changes that we're making.
Yeah. So sparrows seem to be mostly super adapted to life with humans. And so that's kind of a optimistic view that some species are going to be able to adapt totally, and some are not. So some birds are going to do fine during this and some are not going to do fine. If you are looking, I don't even want to recommend this book at this stage, but in conservation biology, we read The Sixth Extinction, which is a really, really good book, but it's super depressing. It's about climate change and the Anthropocene and all of that stuff. And kind of one of the points in that book is that like, we're all connected. So it's not necessarily that all animals are going to die. It's just that like certain ones are going to survive and it might not be humans that survive all of this. So their big thing is that they expect maybe rats will diversify after humans are here into all these different niches and we'll have like crazy amounts of different types of rats or something in the kind of age after the Anthropocene. So I think house sparrows are an example of a species that's really good at adapting to what we've done to the environment. So what traits make some bird species better invaders than others? Jonah, you want to go for it?
So some bird species have like larger brains, which kind of give them like the buffer in a way to use inventive behavior and like the ability to be willing to approach new objects and novel ideas. So those birds are likely better invaders, the ones that can do those things, because they need to adapt to these new environments quickly in order to spread out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Anybody have anything to add to that? Okay, so kind of related to that, you kind of answered it, but how does a big brain help an animal respond to environmental change? You can put that in their own words. Patrick, you want to try?
Yeah, I said that it allows them to be a lot more like innovative. Like the house sparrow, for example, was a lot more innovative than I think it had like 40 something innovative behaviors or something like that compared to like one for a lot of other species. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we think of the big brained ones are big for their size or intricate for their size is basically that they have more ability to kind of change their behavior based on what they're experiencing. So they're not stuck in one form of behavior. So I think a big brain kind of helps with that. So neophobia is the fear of new things. How does this relate to birds that are able to adapt and invade? Jenny, you want to do that one?
I said that like it helps because birds that like invade are just like they're not like as scared of things, and they seem to have a love for like novelty objects and things they didn't really recognize, so they would just approach it. So like
Yeah.
because they're not scared, they were able to like invade better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you have just like a complete distrust of new things, you're not going to go to new areas necessarily. So not having that fear means that, yeah, you'll invade a new park or a new city or anything like that, and it doesn't really matter. I thought of it a lot with, is it Kim? You're the only one from that group in this class, I think. But the ecology project about putting different like objects near the bird feeders and seeing which one they would be scared of. I hadn't actually read that study that said house sparrows actually preferred to go to new objects or enjoyed them, and that would have been an interesting thing to know for your project last year. Zach, go ahead.
Didn't they also say that like they had to have a balance, or, like they had to also know enough to fear new predators?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're still being selected against if they don't survive it, you know. So it has to go both ways. So what are some advantages of group living? Jonah?
So some advantages include predator protection because there's like a large group. It makes it easier to either fight back or avoid predation.
Mm-hmm.
Also faster at finding food, and also solving problems quicker, which was the really interesting one to me because they showed in some of the research that birds in a group will likely figure out puzzles to get a reward, like what was it, like 11 times faster or something, and they'll get the food like 7 times faster than just individuals, even if they're very bright individuals. And that's like a very human-like trait, and we like to compare things to humans, so in that way that's definitely one of the advantages. And also when one learns a skill, all the others learn it a lot faster, so
Mm-hmm.
teaching each other kind of.
Yeah, I was thinking back to the birds on Barbados from one of the earlier chapters where they were saying it was the bullfinch, right, was the smart one, and the grassquit was the dumb one. That they couldn't really tell if the bullfinch really had insight into it or just was pecking and willing to peck and willing to like kind of figure out things. And that's what I think of when you add more individuals in your group who are all happy to try new things. You're going to peck your way to the food that much quicker because everyone's trying it on their own and curious about it. So that was kind of interesting. So I feel like she was really talking a lot about the difference between species level and individual level variation in intelligence and boldness. So can you kind of explain why it matters that there are both species level or individual level and what that difference is? Is that too hard of a question? Andre, want to try? Go ahead.
This was number 6, right?
Yeah.
All right, just want to make sure I'm not crazy. So what I put was, for instance, some individuals within a species can be clever problem solvers. If one individual learns to complete a task or overcome a challenge, the rest of the group members can learn it relatively quick. So with that said, groups that face ecological challenges or rather new challenges will be more successful and quicker at solving these problems rather than individuals who fly solo, so to speak. And it's due to the intelligence of individuals and their varying abilities, experiences, and temperaments. And although a species may overall have like behaviors or traits, there is variance within those traits and behaviors.
Yeah, so like we think of like, oh, a species like crow, like American crow is smart, you know, and they can figure stuff out. But and then what's a, you know, a mourning dove maybe is dumb and can't figure stuff out or something like that. So it's the species level differences, right? We kind of group them together in general, and then that's usually what we talk about, like brain size and ability to reason. We kind of put that on the species level. But it's kind of interesting that all of those differences. So if there's like this spectrum where crows are smarter than mourning doves, within the crows there's also smart and dumber birds. And that's kind of important because everything we talk about natural selection there has to be variation to start, right? There has to be variation in some sort of trait for natural selection to work on. And I think her point there is like, yeah, there's a lot of variation within a species, and then that allows, maybe it's super beneficial to have that big brain and be smarter and not afraid of new objects and stuff. Or maybe it's beneficial to go the other way and just be really set in your ways, and then you end up being selected for that. And that's kind of how evolution works together with these personality traits. And like personality traits is like something that people hated saying that as applied to animals for a really long time, but now I think we have less and less problems saying it, because yeah, they have personalities, like their level of boldness, their level of aggression, that's all a personality trait, and that happens on the individual level, and then the sum of all those individuals is what kind of happens at the species level.
Yeah, exactly. Like Ben, for instance, with his personality.
Yes, Ben is a aloof jerk personality. So I think the house sparrows in Kenya kind of solidify this, right? So we know that house sparrows as a species are really good at invading. They aren't afraid of human objects and everything. So what was the difference in the house sparrows near the invasion front in Kenya versus those in the older population? Patrick, go ahead.
I said that basically the older population or the older generation tended to shy away from like newer foods that they weren't familiar with, while the newer generation basically didn't really care what was in front of them. As long as it was edible, they ate it.
Yeah, and so it's like two things are happening, right? Either the more aggressive or less scared individuals are the ones on the front, and they're moving out, or it's that the ones that aren't able to adapt are dying if they happen to be at the invasion front, right? Because they can't figure out that there's new foods to exploit on there. And so that's kind of that spectrum playing out kind of within one country now, because we can actually watch this invasion happening. And I love that. I'm going to listen to every newscaster now and see if I can hear house sparrows in the background, because that's what they said they could tell if house sparrows had invaded an area based on if they could hear it on the news. It's pretty cool. So what are some disadvantages to being flexible in your foraging habits? There's some pretty graphic disadvantages that they came up with. Jenny, you want to try?
Some of the disadvantages are like they're just more willing to eat anything, and those can be like toxic to them and get them sick. Like with the heron was eating like a stingray, and that was fine, but then I think it was a pelican, like a brown pelican, tried it and that killed it. So it's like dangerous to just try to eat whatever.
Yeah, because like you don't know if what you're eating is toxic or not and could kill you. So like if you make the risk and it's a good reward because you get a really good food, that's great. But if you make the risk and you die, like that's natural selection happening. So explain the relationship between smart, adaptable bird lineages and the number of species in that lineage. Why would this relationship hold? It's kind of another evolution question. Patrick, do you want to try?
So I said that a lot of these species that usually develop these like bigger like brains and are like highly adaptable tend to speciate a lot quicker than smaller brain birds. Like I was talking about with like sparrows and like blackbirds, how there were thousands of species of them, but like there were like 5 or 6 species of quail, which aren't really all that innovative.
Mm-hmm. And so why would that be happening? Why would speciation events happen?
It's because they have like such a huge variation in like behaviors and stuff that you know, one population of a I don't know, a house sparrow is a lot more bold when like, you know, exploring dumpsters, and others are like, you know, more at home in like a suburb. So that could, you know, if you give that, you know, several thousand years, that could result in speciation.
Mm-hmm. And like if we think back to the juncos, right? So we saw all those juncos in like Central America, and then the juncos had kind of speciated as they came up into North America. It's that the bold ones are more willing to colonize new areas. So like if you're bold and willing to kind of invade new areas, you're maybe the one that invaded after the, you know, glaciers are treated. That's the case with the junco, right? Those birds are really willing to move north in that time period, and then they encountered new environments, and then they changed what they were. Not as dramatically in the dark-eyed junco, but other species are going to radiate into a whole bunch of different species. And same thing, I think of it, that junco that ended up on the island, right, in the Pacific. Like maybe it was chance, but maybe also some of these birds were willing to fly out over the ocean, and that's how they got to these different places and then became their own species, because once they were there and the selection pressures were there, they had to evolve into something a little bit different. So it seems like if you are willing to move and kind of go to these new places, you're going to encounter new environments, and the natural selection is going to work on you, and maybe turn you into a different species. Does that make sense to everybody? It gives me hope for urbanization, because it means that like some of these birds really have the ability to change. And so we think of really, you know, urbanization and climate change as these super dire things. And then sometimes I'm like, well, but some of them do have the ability to really rapidly evolve. Some of them don't, and that's going to be a big bummer. So good question, Allison. How can birds adapt or not adapt to climate change? Give an example of a study that looked at this from the reading. Zach, you want to try?
I don't remember exactly the name of the study, but it was the one where they studied the like mountain birds that had adjusted their range on the mountain, like they moved up to continue with the colder climate as it was changing.
Yeah, which in the short term can work really well because you just follow the climate that you want. Mountains are sad because as they move up, there's less and less habitat as they're moving up like that. And they might run out of habitat at some point, but that is an example of they can modify. One of the examples in the book, I think, was with like invertebrate abundance. Did anyone remember that one? Nobody? I'm pretty sure it was chickadees, and that's why I remember it. It was that, you know, certain migratory birds we don't think are going to be able, because all of their timing of migration is tied to day length and things like that. It's not tied to climate. But a bird that's a resident like a chickadee, they can just kind of move their breeding season with climate change. So they can adjust to breeding a little bit earlier if that's when the caterpillars are available. So there's also going to be some resident birds who don't even have to move. They're just going to shift earlier in the season potentially. So you're either going to move geographically or you're going to move temporally, basically, to adapt to climate change. And if you have that ability to adapt, you're going to be just fine. But a lot of them aren't going to have that ability to adapt. So playing into that, it sounds like being adaptive would be, you know, the thing everyone should be doing. But why would being a stupid bird be adaptive? Zach, you want to go?
I said that it's like not necessarily that they're stupid, it's that they're just really well adapted to a specific thing. So I forget, I think it was the Kagus was the
Mhm.
example in the book, where like we kind of think they're stupid because they charge at predators, but they had adapted that kind of behavior when there weren't predators on the island, and now that there is, it's not advantageous, so they're just being selected against.
Yeah, like in their evolutionary history, there was no reason for them to be running away from everything. They might as well just stay put and keep foraging, or, go see new stimuli. And then with the introduction of humans and predators, this is now counterproductive for them. But it wasn't necessarily not adaptive in their evolutionary history. Everything that we see in birds was adaptive for some reason. It's just maybe not working in their current state. And then finally, what is the relationship between fecundity, survival, and brain size? I missed who just raised their hand. Oh, Patrick.
So this is number 12, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I said that birds with with smaller brains typically had shorter lifespans, but they had like large clutch sizes. And this would lead to I mean, they had like lower survivability individually, but this type of sort of life strategy, I guess you might call it, allows for like a huge exponential increase in their population size when conditions are like good.
Mhm.
But it can kind of backfire when if it's like a bad year, if it's like there's not a lot of food. And it's kind of like the opposite with like the bigger brained birds, because
Mhm.
they like they have like a longer lifespan, so they can actually kind of like create their own strategies for trying to survive in those off years.
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, big brains, long survival, lower fecundity per year. Small brains, short survival, and really fecund. That's kind of the relationship. Yeah, it's the live fast, die young hypothesis. That's trademarked me. Okay, so some more, now that we've technically finished the book, I feel like this book kind of ended with a meh, didn't end with any sort of big, bold statement. What did you guys think about the ending of the book? What did she leave you with? What's your main takeaway from that last chapter? Patrick?
I mean, she kind of like just kind of said, like birds are smart, and we're still learning a lot about them. Didn't really, she didn't really let me check. I forgot what bird she said that she was like talking about with like the fog lifting.
I think it was a chickadee.
Yeah, I think it was chickadee. Hold on.
Yeah, she's just like, and then there's more to know. I don't know.
Yeah, basically it's the extraordinary genus packed tightly into the tiny puff of feathers.
I mean,
Yeah.
was that unsatisfying to you guys, or did you think it was fine? I really liked this book, and I didn't really like the way it ended, necessarily.
It was an okay ending, I think. Not not disastrous, but also not totally fulfilling.
Yeah. Jenny, go ahead.
Like, I just kind of wish there was more of like a conclusion, I guess, because it kind of just, she finished her last example from what she was talking about, and then just had that one small paragraph about the chickadee, and that was supposed to be the ending.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I didn't really
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah, I felt I wanted more, I think, but I don't know what I wanted. I don't know what I would have put in there necessarily, because it wasn't a book about how to save the birds or something like that, that she could have like stirred us to have some sort of thing. It's just, it kind of is a book. Like, that's what I was asking. Like, what do you think was the author's main goal of writing this book? Like, what was her takeaway message that she wanted us to know? What do you guys think? Yeah, Jenny, what do you think?
I would say her message was kind of just like, don't underestimate birds, because even ones that are like stupid are still not, like, they just do things differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of as close as I could get. Like, in general, like, you know, don't underestimate the stupid ones, and also, like, the birds are a lot smarter than you maybe realize, and this is meant to teach you about that. In that way, I was surprised that this book is so, you know, people love it and it's like a bestseller and all that stuff, because it doesn't really have a strong message necessarily, besides like, look at this cool information about birds. But my thought is that it all relates to the fact that, like why are people so interested in birds? Like, people really care about birds. Why do you think that is? Because it's the same people who are interested in birds who pick up this book and love it, and made it a bestseller. So, like, what's going on here? Why are birds this like fanatical kind of hobby for people? Pat, what do you think?
I think it's just because there's just so many birds around, like no matter where you go, you know, they're on all 7 continents, including Antarctica. There's like what, like 10,000 species of birds living today, something like that. You know, there's just so many of them, and they come in all different variations. Like, you know, you can get like the tiny hummingbirds all the way up to, you know, the size of like 3 humans with like an ostrich.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say they're just, I don't know, they're just really cool because they are like, they can just be like, they fill so many different ecological roles. Like, you know, some of them are scavengers, some are super predators, some are like grazers. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, they're just weird.
But do you think that's why people are obsessed with them?
I mean, that's why I'm obsessed with them.
I mean, that's why I'm obsessed with them too, but I don't think it's all scientists who are reading this book that made her able to write it and it become popular. It's not just scientists who are reading it. So, like, why do people like birds so much? I think you're right that it could be, you know, like, partially just that they, you know, they're there to be seen. But Jenny, what do you think?
Birds are just cute, honestly, especially like songbirds. Like, I feel like people would just read about it because they think they're cute and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think they're cute and you see them, right? So, like, everyone has seen a bird. You know, maybe not everyone's seen a whale or a giraffe or a rhinoceros or something, but everyone's seen a bird. Zach, what do you want to add?
Kind of like piggybacking off of that, the whole reason like I'm honestly taking this class and am interested in birds myself is because I didn't realize how much I didn't know about them. I mean, it's kind of dumb to say that out loud, but like there's just so much more to them than I ever realized. And like when I took wildlife toxicology and that guy came in and taught us about migratory birds, like some of the stuff I learned just like blew my mind. So I think maybe a lot of people kind of like take birds for granted and don't realize how much there is to know about them and how
Yeah.
interesting they are. And that could be kind of why.
Yeah, so there's something that you see every day, but then you start kind of doing a little bit more research and realize that, like, there's really cool stuff going on. Yeah, Andre.
I was just gonna say, like, piggybacking off of what Zach said, like how so many people seem to take them for granted almost, or like it's funny. Over the past few weeks of being home and being around my friends, going on hikes, it's like I'm constantly hearing birds and like pinpointing out loud what bird call I'm hearing or what I'm seeing, and it's like almost something they're completely blind to, or not blind to, but they're just not. You're not, like, every time I wake up now, I hear a call. I'm like, oh, that's a songbird. That's a house sparrow, that's a cardinal. Like, and I feel like there's so many people who just, that doesn't even phase them.
Yeah, but there's actually a huge proportion of people who do get excited by it the same way that we are. Like, you learn a little bit and then you start listening, and then it's not something that, I mean, people do spend a ton of money going birding all over the world, but you don't have to. You can pretty much find birds to see. So, I mean, I think my feeling is like the fact that this book exists is a sign of like just that there's something about birds that get people interested. And I think it's like, in my mind, it's a combination of being able to see them really easily. Like, because even if you like studied mammals, like people don't see mammals as often. And then they're pretty and they're cute and they do interesting things that you can all observe. And that kind of gets people hooked. And then they actually want to learn more about them the way this book is kind of laid out. So I think her goal, it was just like, here's some stuff. Like that's what I took away from it. Usually I think of these books as having some sort of conservation agenda. She kind of gets into that with climate change in the end, but she stays away from it. Like there isn't a full chapter on like bird conservation or anything like that. It's really just about their intelligence, and that's kind of cool. Any other thoughts about the end of the book? If you can see, like, you probably didn't realize the book was ending because these are all of her notes at the end of it, and it references a whole bunch of different articles and stuff that she read, which is actually going to be super handy when we start doing our project after spring break, because you're not going to be able to cite this book, but it would be very easy to go look. If you're like, I remember that study that she talked about in this chapter, go find the article that she was referencing and put that article into your paper. So don't throw your book out the window yet. It's not done. Okay, so now I want to switch gears and go back to migration, right? Did anyone have any questions from the last lecture on migration? So get out that paper that I kind of had you guys look at last time. So the paper was High Intensity Urban Light Installation Dramatically Alters Nocturnal Bird Migration. So a vague title, but what was this paper about? Who can summarize it super shortly? What were they studying? What was the high intensity urban light installation? Zach, save me. What do you got?
It's the 9/11 like memorial lights that they put up every year. It's like
Yeah.
the two, I think it's like two beams or spotlights that just go straight up in the place that the towers used to be.
Yeah, so it's something that we should, I felt like around here when I first started hearing about these studies that were going on, I was like, oh yeah, that's an issue. So this is the two beams of light that they turn on 9/11 to kind of as a day of remembrance. And so what happens to the birds in this ray of light? So it's in September. Obviously, this is the peak, or can be the peak, of fall migration. So when the birds are headed back down to South America or Central America. And so basically, there's a big beam of light is a real distraction for them on their migration. It gets them stuck potentially in the light beam as they're migrating through. So I'll go over a couple things and I'll give you guys a chance to read that paper a little bit more. So they talk about ALAN in this, which is artificial light at night. But they use this nice acronym for it, which is basically just like anthropogenic light, right? And the 9/11 tribute is one of the most extreme forms of anthropogenic light. And the fact that it's going straight up into the air seems to be part of its issue. But why would it interfere with migration? Why would birds have trouble, based on what you already know about how birds migrate? that we learned. Why would having a really intense light potentially interfere with migration? Andre?
So I don't fully like have an answer, but I know like we talked about this, like don't birds use like don't they rely on the stars a lot of the time for migration and for traveling?
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously light pollution is going to have an impact on that.
Right. So they are keying, and we know that they use the stars as a compass. That's one of the ways. Who else? Zach, did you raise your hand?
I did, but it was actually unrelated. I just kind of had something that popped into my head because like a really long time ago, I was watching a podcast with the guy that actually designed this, and he noted another really interesting like side effect is, other than like them getting lost, is it also attracts a lot of bugs. So a lot of them go to it also to eat all the bugs that are in that light and everything too. I don't really remember.
Yeah, and then it goes up a trophic level from there too, because there's bugs, and then there's migrating birds that stop to eat the bugs, and then there's migrating, or not migrating, but like peregrine falcons and other types of hawks that are going to try to eat the birds that are trying to get the bugs in the light. So both things can happen. So let's watch. I'm gonna have to get up and let Ben the dog out. These afternoon classes Ben struggles with. I found he doesn't like sitting still for them. So this is from New York City Audubon that did this video. So it kind of explains what they were doing. You guys can hear that, right?
The memorial happens during the peak of fall migration, and birds that migrate at night use light cues in the sky and can get distracted and confused by lights.
We are counting birds, how many birds are in the beams every 20 minutes. And if the numbers get really high and the birds start going low, we ask if they can turn the lights out. We should care about birds because they're part of the whole thing. And we should care about anything that's on this planet with us. I loved seeing the surprise on people's faces when they had no idea that birds even migrate, let alone at night, and then that they have obstacles. And the more people know, I think the better birds have a chance.
Okay, so that was kind of Audubon's take of it. I feel like they kind of quickly went through the video of it, but there's a whole bunch of these videos are actually linked to the paper that we read. But this is kind of what it looks like from below. So yeah, all those little dots are birds flying around. Littler dots are bugs probably, but so if we go back to this, so the big thing, and this was a big deal, that what they do is that they have people sitting under there counting the birds, and when the birds hit a certain density of birds caught in the lights, they actually turn the lights off. And I had no idea they were doing this. I found out about this last summer. I went to a bird conference in Alaska, and one of the big plenary keynote speakers was Kyle Horton, who does a lot of this research. And I was the only one who had gotten up in the morning of my friends to go to that plenary. And so after I talked to them, the people I was staying with, I was like, oh, I can't believe it. Like, yeah, like there's no way we're going to turn off those lights long term, but it's great that they can, like, you know, at least turn them off. And my friends who were from Maryland and Colorado were like, that's so stupid. Like that light should not exist. They should never turn that light on again. And I was like, well, you don't know New Yorkers. Like New Yorkers are not going to be okay with that light going off completely. And so this is like the best case scenario. But this paper I thought was really cool because they found a better way to quantify the birds in there rather than just people sitting below and counting them, which is kind of what we talked about last time, which is that they used a combination of a whole bunch of kind of new types of recording. The main ones were using radar to count how many birds were in the light, and also acoustic recording. So I want you guys to take a few minutes. I'm going to leave this up and give you maybe like 10 minutes to look over the paper and try to answer these questions yourself. This is from the intro or the abstract. What other environmental variables can make the effect of artificial light at night greater? How did the authors quantify disturbance to the birds? What effect did the tribute in life have on birds directly? Like, how did it change their behaviors? And indirectly, what could have happened to them? And what are the 3 ways that they counted birds? So in the 3 ways, what does each method of counting birds vary, and how does each method vary, and what information it provides? Because they all provide different information. So take like 10 minutes, work on that, and then we'll kind of meet back here in around 10 minutes. Oh, I'm so annoyed. I forgot to hit record when we came back to talk about this stuff, and the students had good perspective on some of the stuff, but I'm just gonna really quickly go over this in case people are watching it later who missed class today and need to know. So the questions: what other environmental variables can make the effect of artificial light at night greater? What they were concerned about was something like low cloud ceiling or a lot of fog that can really exacerbate this artificial light issue. Those are already things that affect birds on their migration. So it seemed like they could potentially make it even worse if there was a lot of artificial light involved. What they kind of found in the end was like they were seeing this disturbance based on this light even on clear nights. And what they think is like this is a very extreme type of light, and that could be what's going on here. So how did the authors quantify a disturbance to birds? So they had 3 things that they were looking at. They were looking at density of birds in the area versus a nearby area that didn't have this light on it, velocity or flight speed of the birds in the area, and then number of calls per time in the area. So I'll skip down to what were the 3 ways that they counted birds. So they were using radar, and the radar can pick up numbers of individual birds, and that's how they were able to compare density in this area to density in another area. But they also did visual sightings of people sitting underneath, and that was kind of cool because you can go to their actual eBird list and see all the different species that they identified that were stuck in the lights. And then they also did acoustic recordings that basically are picking up the flight calls as the birds are kind of flying over and or stuck in the lights. So what effect did the tribute and light have on birds? I think it's easiest by looking at some of these graphs. So this is a graph of their density, and they kind of label it migration activity. And you can kind of see, give me a pointer. So here's the best example here that the lights are on in the green and off in the gray. So in the green time here, there's just the density of birds over the light is increasing up to this crazy peak, at which point they decide to shut off the lights. So they shut off lights and you see the birds decrease their density in this area, turn the lights back on, the birds come back, turn them off, they go down, and we kind of see this kind of following through. And overall, the amount of increase in this area compared to an area that doesn't have the light is much higher when the lights are on. That's what this is showing. The other way they looked at it was through velocity, or like the flight speed of the bird. And so this is an inverse relationship. So when the lights are on, the birds in the area are flying really slowly kind of in this area. That's because they're just kind of stuck and circling in the area. When they turn them off, the flight speed of birds in the area increase, because this is them actually going on migration and headed in one direction. Turn it back on and all the birds slow down again, turn it off and they kind of come back up again. And so overall, you see now when the lights are off, the flight speeds in the area are much higher because the birds are just passing over. It should take them, you know, not very long at all to get over Manhattan. They shouldn't be stalled there for any length of time. They should just be getting on their way. And then vocal activity in the end, this is a kind of a proxy for density, so how much they're calling. We see as the lights goes on, we see more and more vocal activity, which is probably more individual birds in the area, and then turned off, it jumps back down, turned off, it goes back down. So overall, when the lights are on, we see a lot more calls per minute over the lights. So going back to the questions, directly, what did they do? What effect did the tribute lights have? Directly, it increased the density of birds in that area, it decreased their flight speeds, and it increased the amount of calls, or the flight calls in the area, which is basically increased the number of birds. But indirectly, the authors talked about that what this does, it not only just stops the birds for a little bit, but it can have kind of far-reaching impacts, because migration is already kind of an exhausting feat. And so stopping and just flying in circles for an entire night or a long portion of your night can lead to just all-out exhaustion where the birds can die, or it makes them have to stop and refuel way sooner than they should have if they were just headed on their way. Also, being stuck in downtown Manhattan, they have much more likelihood of crashing into buildings or being eaten by predators, because that's not an area that they would normally be spending any time in during migration. That's not really a good spot for them to be stopped. And so they were seeing a lot of building strikes with these birds, which is partially why they were able to do this thing like shut off the lights, which is such a big deal, because people were finding a lot of dead migratory birds the night after the Tribune lights. So kind of another way that they looked at this was distance away from the actual light. So the x-axis here is distance from the light. The y-axis is migration activity or density. And we see that near the light, we have really high density of birds, and then it kind of decreases, which shows that like birds aren't migrating in this type of dense format in other parts of the sky. They're tied into that light. And same thing with velocity. Close to the light, we have really low speed, and then as they move away from the light, the speed increases. This is now looking temporally, so the time since they turned off the lights is on the x-axis, and we see again, if density is really high right as they turned off the lights, it kind of eases down to a normal density, and the same with velocity, it kind of increases back up to a normal velocity as time since they turned off the lights increases. So I think this quote from the end is really interesting. It just says that Tribune light is arguably one of the world's most iconic and emotional displays of light. The fact that the event's organizers and participants were willing to periodically shut down the lights for the benefit of migratory birds is an encouraging acknowledgement of the importance of bird conservation. Moreover, despite occasional confusion and frustration among the Tribune's viewers, media coverage often highlighted a unified message from stakeholders about balancing potential hazards to migrating birds with the intent and spirit of the display. So I thought this was really cool, just in terms of that we were able, like people cared enough about birds to do this in a very emotional setting, basically, where these Tribune lights are happening. So we skipped over this. We're going to talk about it next time. And that's pretty much it. Spring breaks next week, and your first field trip assignment is due Monday, April 6th. Okay. Thanks for listening.